Welcome to our deep dive. You guys, we're going to be looking at the 2022 University of Idaho killings.
Oh, yes.
And you have given us just a fascinating collection of stuff,
Yeah.
like Wikipedia entries and just a ton of news coverage to go through.
Yeah.
So we're really going to try to piece this all together and get a good picture of what happened. And really, I think even more than what happened, what's so captivating about this case is kind of the why.
Oh, absolutely. And what really strikes me about this one in particular is the contrast,
Yeah.
We've got this seemingly peaceful, college town,
Right.
Moscow, Idaho, small town.
Yeah.
And, the last murder there was back in 2015.
Right.
And then suddenly this just horrific crime happens and it just totally shatters that sense of security that you think they had,
It really is it makes you think about how random these things can be,
Absolutely.
It can happen anywhere.
Anywhere.
So, okay, let's set the scene a little bit. We are talking about a house shared by 5 University of Idaho students,
Okay.
3 stories, 6 bedrooms.
Wow.
And tragically, 4 of those students become victims in this.
And it's so important to remember that these aren't just names, in a headline.
Yeah.
We're talking about people. We're talking about Ethan Chapin, 20 years old, Kaylee Goncalves, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and Madison Mogan, who is also 21.
Right.
Each one a person, with their own story, dreams, and they had families and friends who loved them.
Absolutely. And just their lives were cut way too short.
Yeah.
And it's, you go through and you read all these details and it's so mundane, but then it's chilling, right?
Right.
They were out at parties and bars on November 12th, 2022.
Yeah, typical college student.
Just typical college student stuff, out having fun.
Yeah.
But what's so interesting is, how investigators have really been able to piece together this really detailed timeline.
Yeah.
And they're using everything from security footage to social media posts, witness statements.
I mean, it just goes to show you, technology and investigations these days.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It's amazing.
It really
It's
is.
like a digital jigsaw puzzle.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's you can put all these pieces together and then you see the picture.
Totally.
For instance, 2 of the victims, Kaylee and Madison, were seen at a food truck.
Okay.
And they're leaving there around 1:41 a.m. And all 4 victims are believed to be back at the house by 2:0 a.m.
Right. And that right there, that seemingly normal detail
Yeah.
becomes a huge part of that timeline,
Right.
It helps them narrow down, okay, this is when it had to have happened. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, it's really important.
But then, as the night goes on, things take a really dark turn.
Yeah.
Between 2:26 a.m. and 2:52 a.m., there are 7 unanswered calls from Kaylee's phone to her ex-boyfriend, and 3 more calls from Madison's phone to that same person. And later, one of the surviving roommates believes that they heard one of the victims say, "There's someone here."
Wow.
But 911 wasn't called until 11:58 the next morning.
It's unsettling, isn't it?
So unsettling.
Those unanswered calls and that delayed 911 call. Just so many questions.
I know what was going on.
Yeah, in those hours,
I know.
It's a big question mark.
And then the police finally get there, and it's just a gruesome scene.
Oh, I bet.
4 students stabbed to death.
Terrible.
No sign of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. And the murder weapon, which they believe was a fixed blade knife, is missing.
Okay, so the lack of forced entry, the fact that nothing was taken, it really points to a targeted attack.
Right.
Which, just adds to the fear and mystery surrounding this whole thing.
Right.
And the missing weapon.
Another piece of the puzzle
Huge piece.
that they had to try to find.
Yeah,
The investigation was massive.
I bet.
I mean, you're talking about the Moscow PD, Idaho State Police, the FBI, all working together on this.
Wow.
And early on, they zero in on a white Elantra that was seen near the crime scene around the time of the murders.
Okay.
It seemed like such a small detail at the time, but it turned out to be huge for the case.
Well, it just goes to show you, right?
Yeah.
Seemingly unimportant details can be the most important evidence. It's incredible. And it also shows you the power of those public tips. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People calling in, saying what they saw, really important.
Absolutely.
And that white Elantra, that became the focal point.
Right.
A real lead in this whole sea of unknowns.
Absolutely.
It was something to grab onto.
Right.
Something real.
And that lead eventually led them to Bryan Kohberger.
Okay.
a 28-year-old criminology PhD student at nearby Washington State University.
Interesting.
He drove a white Elantra, he'd expressed interest in criminal behavior,
Okay.
and his cell phone data even placed him near the crime scene.
So all the pieces were fitting together.
Right, it seemed like almost too perfect in a way.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Yeah, I mean, Kohberger's background in criminology it's fascinating.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder, did his studies influence his actions at all?
Right.
Did he use what he was learning to try and stay one step ahead,
It's chilling to think about.
Yeah, a little bit.
And then there's all this information about his online activity.
Right.
Before his arrest, he was active on these, online forums and expressing some pretty, disturbing thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, I mean, his online activity is super fascinating,
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons, like its potential insights into,
Right.
into his psyche.
Right.
But it also, begs the question, what's the role of social media in all of this?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, could there have been warning signs that were missed?
Right.
Like, could things have been different if somebody had noticed?
Right. Could there have been intervention?
Exactly. These are all things we have to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so to be clear, Kohberger was arrested at his parents' house in Pennsylvania on December 30th, 2022.
Okay.
He was extradited to Idaho, indicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary.
Wow.
Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty.
Okay.
A decision supported by Kaylee's father, Steve Goncalves. The trial, after multiple delays, is set for August 2025.
The death penalty decision, I mean,
Yeah.
that just adds a whole other layer
A whole other, yeah.
to this. It brings up the debate about capital punishment. What is justice?
Right, what does justice even look like in a
Guard-
situation like this?
Right, exactly.
And we also know that Kohberger was a teaching assistant at WSU.
Okay.
And just a couple of weeks before the murders, faculty members actually met with him to discuss concerns about his behavior.
Oh, wow.
He was ultimately let go from that role on December 19th.
So it sounds like there were red flags.
Yeah, it's like they saw something, but nobody really connected the dots,
Right. It's just a sad reminder that even when the signs are there,
Yeah.
sometimes you can't predict what's going to happen.
You can't predict it.
No.
And it highlights the need for better systems.
Totally.
For identifying and addressing this concerning behavior.
Yeah,
Especially in those settings like universities where you've got young adults who are just figuring things out, navigating life.
Exactly. It's such a crucial time, in development.
Absolutely.
And just being able to be aware of those warning signs.
Yeah.
And having a system in place to be like, okay, what do we do when we see these things?
Right, exactly.
Super important.
So, okay, we've laid out the basic facts of the case.
Okay.
The victims, the timeline, the investigation, the arrest of Bryan Kohberger.
Right.
But I think what's really intriguing here is what lies beneath the surface,
Absolutely.
There's so much more to this than just a whodunit.
Right. It's a deep dive into, the human psyche.
Yes.
What motivates people.
Yeah.
How can seemingly ordinary people have this dark potential?
Right.
It's a puzzle.
And to really understand it,
Yeah.
we need to delve into those deeper layers.
Totally.
What was going on with Bryan Kohberger?
Yes.
Who was he? What was going on in his mind?
What led him to do this?
And what could have possibly led him to do something so horrific?
Yeah.
Right?
Big questions.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I think a good place to start is with Kohberger's digital footprint.
Okay.
And specifically, his online activity in the years before the murders.
Right.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, and I mean, from what I've read, it seems like those posts paint a pretty disturbing picture.
Yeah.
This is a guy who, at 16, was writing about feeling like a sack of meat.
Right, and those early posts on Tapatalk, the online forum, they're really insightful. He was using a username back then. So authorities, they couldn't definitively link those posts to him until after he was arrested.
Right, right.
But they offer a glimpse, into his mindset back then.
Right.
His struggles with what he called visual snow.
Right.
Which is this neurological condition that can cause, visual disturbances.
It just sounds incredibly isolating.
Oh, absolutely.
To feel like that.
Yeah.
He described feeling like he was living in a video game, detached from his own body.
Yeah, and that sense of detachment, of not feeling real, it seems to be a recurring theme in his thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
He wrote about feeling depressed, isolated, even criminal,
Wow.
even though he don't have any criminal record at that point.
Right.
And what's even more chilling is how he talked about this lack of emotion.
Right.
Like, claiming he could do whatever he wanted with little remorse.
Yeah, and it's unsettling to read that.
Totally.
Especially considering, what happened later.
It's like those early writings were almost foreshadowing something darker,
Yeah.
Like, was this a cry for help that was missed?
Right. Was it a warning sign?
Yeah,
And then there are those posts where he claims to have discovered the cause and cure for his visual snow.
Right.
Like attributing it to inflammation caused by candida, like a yeast infection.
Interesting, right.
That's very interesting.
I mean, there's no scientific evidence to support that.
Right.
But it's possible that this fixation on candida and, these detox diets, maybe that contributed to his later obsession with veganism.
Right.
And his extreme aversion to any cross-contamination with animal products.
Right. And we've heard about how meticulous he was about his food preparation.
Oh, yeah, refusing to let his food touch surfaces that might have even come into contact with animal products.
Yeah, it's a level of almost like a phobia almost,
It seems like it, yeah.
And then there's, the reports of his compulsive cleaning habits. Like meticulously cleaning his car inside and out, just weeks after the murders. And then wearing surgical gloves to dispose of his garbage
Wow.
in a neighbor's crash can.
It's like he was hyper aware of forensic evidence, trying to erase any trace of himself,
Yeah, almost like he was putting his academic knowledge to use, but in this really twisted way.
Right, exactly, because he knew.
He knew how it worked.
Yeah, he knew how important even the smallest piece of evidence could be.
Right.
It's like he was living in a real-life crime show,
Right, yeah, he was the star of his own twisted investigation.
Exactly.
Oh, and then there's that rap song he posted on SoundCloud.
Oh, yeah, under the alias Exar, right?
Yes, Exar.
Yeah, I mean, the lyrics, they're dark, man.
Yeah, it's rough.
Talking about violence, killing, even referring to himself as the devil.
Yeah, it's how do you not interpret that?
I know.
In light of the murders.
It's hard.
It really is.
Was he trying to tell us something? Was it some form of, catharsis for him?
Right.
Or was it something more sinister?
Right, like a glimpse into his fantasies.
Exactly.
It's very ambiguous and it's hard to know, but it raises this really crucial question.
What's that?
At what point do these expressions, cross the line from just dark thoughts to something actionable?
That's the question, isn't it? And how do we, as a society, identify and address those potential red flags?
Right.
Before they escalate into something like this?
Before it's too late.
Yeah.
It's a tough question.
It is. There's no easy answer, but it definitely underscores the need for greater awareness and understanding of those warning signs,
Yeah.
Especially in cases like Kohberger's, where there seems to be this pattern of escalating behavior.
Right.
And this growing fascination with violence.
Absolutely.
So, it's something we need to be paying attention to.
Okay, so let's move on to his activities while he was studying for his PhD at DeSales University.
Okay.
He posted this survey on Reddit
Oh, yeah.
asking criminals to detail their thoughts and feelings before, during, and after committing a crime.
And remember, this was just a few months before the murders in Idaho.
Yeah.
And the questions he asked, they were incredibly specific.
Oh, yeah.
He wanted to know, how they chose their victims,
Right.
how they planned and carried out the crime,
Right.
their feelings during the act,
Right.
and the steps they took to avoid getting caught.
It's almost like he was creating a blueprint
Yeah.
for committing the perfect crime.
It's chilling, isn't it?
It is.
But it's hard to disagree with that the timing, the specificity of the questions.
Yeah.
It all just becomes incredibly suspicious when you consider what happened a few months later.
Absolutely. And then there are those allegations about his Instagram activity.
Right, that he was following 3 of the female victims.
Right. Kaylee, Maddie, and Xana.
Yeah.
And there were even claims that he had repeatedly messaged one of them trying to initiate contact.
If that's true, that would suggest a whole other level
Right.
of fixation on the victims.
Yeah, potentially even stalking.
Yeah, potentially.
Right, he may have been trying to establish some sort of connection, however superficial.
Yeah, get on the radar.
Yeah, before allegedly putting his plan into action.
Right.
And then there's that story about him allegedly frequenting the Mad Greek restaurant in Moscow.
Oh, yeah, where Maddie and Xana worked as servers.
Right.
I remember reading about that.
So, a former employee at the restaurant claimed that Kohberger had dined there at least twice,
Okay.
ordering vegan pizza
Hmm.
and being extremely meticulous about how his food was prepared.
Right.
Like refusing to let it touch surfaces that might have come into contact with animal products.
Of course.
So if this is true, it adds another layer to his alleged fixation.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the victims.
Yeah, it's like, why would you choose to eat there?
Right. Of all the places.
Yeah, especially with 2 of the victims working there. It's a little suspicious.
It's very suspicious, but, the restaurant owner has denied these claims.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he said that Kohberger never ate there. And that this former employee is just making stuff up.
Wow. Okay, so conflicting information there.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure.
We don't know for sure.
But it raises questions.
Yeah, and it seems like a pretty big coincidence that he would choose to eat at that specific restaurant.
Right, especially given the information from the affidavit.
Right.
That his phone was pinging off cell towers near the victim's house like 12 times in the months leading up to the murders.
Yeah, it's like, okay, how much of this is coincidence?
Right, exactly. Like, at what point do you go, okay, this is too much?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and then when you combine that with the alleged Instagram activity, the survey he posted, like, a pattern emerges.
It does.
It's obsession.
Premeditation.
Yeah.
A calculated approach to fulfilling those desires.
Yeah, it's chilling to think about. But there's still one big piece of this puzzle that we haven't explored yet.
And what's that?
This online persona, Papa Roger.
Right. And this is where we kind of move from, verified information to speculation.
Right.
It's important to note that there's no concrete evidence linking Kohberger to Papa Roger.
Right.
However, the similarities between their online activity and the timing of those posts are incredibly striking.
Okay, so walk me through this Papa Roger character.
Sure.
What makes him such a compelling piece of this puzzle?
Okay, so Papa Roger was super active in this Facebook group.
Okay.
All dedicated to discussing the Idaho murders. Now, the group, it's gone private since then.
Right.
But screenshots of his posts, they've been circulating online.
Right.
And they reveal some pretty interesting things.
Like what?
Okay, so for example, back in late November, before the police had said anything about the murder weapon publicly,
Right.
Papa Roger posted that it was a large fixed blade knife. Oh, wow.
And even suggested that they had probably found the sheath too.
And that turned out to be true.
Yeah, totally.
Wow.
And it gets even creepier.
Oh, no.
In early December, he posted this diagram of the house.
Okay.
And he was speculating on where they'd find one of the victims' bodies.
Oh, God.
He thought Xana would be in this, very specific spot in the house.
And then they found her there.
Exactly.
Wow.
How did he know that?
Right.
It's like he had insider knowledge.
Yeah.
And then, when the police announced they were looking for a white Elantra,
Right.
Papa Roger was like, nope, that's a red herring.
Wow.
He even made fun of the police for focusing on such a common car.
Yeah.
So it's like he was trying to, mislead,
Totally.
throw them off.
Yeah, divert attention from a crucial piece of evidence.
Right.
For sure.
And then he also said that the killer wasn't a student.
Yep.
And wasn't part of, the victim's immediate circle.
That's right, which, we now know is true.
Which we know is true.
Yeah.
It's like he was trying to control the narrative.
Totally.
Insert himself into the investigation.
It's almost like he wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And what about, after Kohberger was arrested?
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Papa Roger, he disappeared.
Gone.
Account's gone. Poof.
After Kohberger was arrested.
Yeah.
That's a little suspicious.
Super suspicious.
I mean, I guess it could be a coincidence, but it seems awfully convenient.
Right.
Yeah.
What are the chances?
It's a little too perfect.
It is.
Papa Roger is gone, Kohberger's arrested.
Right. So, I mean, we can't say for sure without concrete evidence linking Kohberger to the account.
Right.
But the timing, the details he knew,
Yeah.
it's hard to ignore.
Okay, so after all of this deep dive
Yeah.
into the Idaho murders, what are your, key takeaways?
Oh, man. I think this case is a perfect example of so many things going on today. We've seen how important forensic science and digital evidence are.
Oh, yeah.
Crucial for solving crimes.
Yeah.
But we've also seen how someone who knows about those methods
Right.
can try to use that to their advantage.
Get away with it.
Yeah, it's like a cat and mouse game.
It really is.
But the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah. People's lives.
Right, and it just highlights the challenges law enforcement faces, in this digital world we live in.
Right. Everything's online. There's a digital trail.
It's everywhere.
For everything.
Yeah, and I think we've also been confronted with this, uncomfortable truth.
Yeah.
That violence, it can come from seemingly ordinary people.
Right.
And often without any clear warning signs.
Yeah, just anyone.
Anyone.
And it's terrifying.
It is.
And I mean, these 4 young people,
Yeah.
they were living their lives, they had friends, they had dreams, and
Yeah.
it was all cut short.
Senselessly.
Yeah.
By this just unimaginable violence.
It makes you think about how fragile life is
It does.
and how unpredictable people can be.
Totally.
And it also, begs the question,
What's that?
what role does mental health play in crime prevention?
That's the big one, right?
Yeah.
If Kohberger was dealing with all of this, the depersonalization,
Right.
the isolation, the lack of remorse, his posts suggest,
Could it have been different?
could things have been different if someone had intervened?
Right. If someone had noticed.
That's the question.
It is a question.
A big question.
And I think it's one that we're going to be talking about for a long time.
Oh, yeah. For years to come, for sure.
And this case, I think, really underscores how important it is to be aware of mental health issues.
Especially with young people.
Especially with young people, yeah.
Yeah, and making sure that resources and support are available to them.
Right. We need to create spaces where people feel comfortable reaching out.
Totally.
Where those warning signs, they're recognized and addressed before it's too late.
Before it becomes a tragedy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and as we continue to learn more about this case, and we wait for this trial in 2025,
right.
It's so important that we remember the victims.
Yes.
And their families.
Their families, absolutely.
Justice needs to be served.
It does.
But I also think we have to use this case as an opportunity
to learn.
To learn.
Yeah, to understand.
To grow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, do better.
To do better, to prevent this from happening again.
Right. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is a case that's, it's still unfolding.
Absolutely.
And we encourage you to stay informed, engage in those thoughtful discussions, and really consider, what are the implications of something like this?
Yeah, what can we learn from this?
What can we learn? What can we do better?
Big questions.
Yeah. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.
Stay safe out there.